Hi, good afternoon. Today is Thursday, May 19th, 2022. My name is Ashley Glover, and I'm here with attorneys Kim Christian and Tommaso Marasco. And this presentation is Thinking of Selling Your Home? Details Matter. Thank you all for joining us. Before we begin, let's kick off with a few housekeeping items. Your mics are muted. Submit questions through the Q&A box. I also received a few questions during registration. We've saved time at the end to address as many as we can. This presentation is a half hour. We are recording this and we will email you a link to the video. Let us know how we did in the survey. And finally, if you need me for anything, please send me a message in the chat box. All right, great. Let's get to something a little more fun and we'll introduce our speakers. We will start with Kim Christian. Kim is a dedicated partner at the Russo Law Group. She's been with the firm for over 15 years, helping clients with elder law, special needs, and estate and trust planning. Kim's a member of several bar and board memberships. She was also recognized as a Super Lawyer Rising Star. And Tommy is an associate and the newest attorney to join Russo Law Group. I believe that's still the case, Tommy. Before joining the firm, Tommy had a solo practice in real estate and estate planning. So Tommy and Kim, thank you both for being here. I believe I'm going to flip it to Kim and let her walk us through the agenda.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So happy to have you for this presentation. The first thing I'm going to walk through is what we will cover today. So what should you be doing before putting up that for sale sign? So we're going to talk a little bit about preparation, what we want to be doing before we even put the sign up. This whole presentation is about making the smoothest sale and transition as possible from beginning to end. The second thing we're going to walk through is how can you avoid your home sale from falling apart. So many times when things are not addressed in advance or you didn't know about something, it really creates a lot of stress. And sometimes we call it, it's falling apart, right? So we want to know how we can avoid that issue. And then we're going to talk about what's the role of the attorney in a real estate transaction, because here in New York, you'll have an attorney that represents you in the real estate transaction. So I will be, for lack of better words, moderating this, and my colleague and attorney, Tommaso, will be walking you through the details. You know, he's going to do all the heavy lifting, and I'm just going to answer some questions. But it's a great presentation. We're going to give you a lot of information. So let's, without further ado, go for it. All right. So if you're thinking of selling your home, there's always things to consider. Tommy, tell us a little bit about what we want to consider.
So when we're thinking about what we want to consider, we have to think about, one, what's going to make the deal, as Kim said, the easiest possible, and try and create a smooth process. And also, we also try and foresee and preempt any type of issues that may arise. Okay. One way of doing that is engaging a real estate attorney early on so that they can walk you through the process. A lot of people are not quite familiar, maybe have never done it before, so they don't really know where would I start. So starting with an attorney who's experienced in the matter is definitely going to be a great way to do that. Having the necessary documents in place, having the last deed of record is always helpful to see how title is being held, to make sure that all parties that need to be a part of the transaction are accounted for. If there was any work ever done, were the proper permits taken out, were the certificates of completion ever filed, and if it's associated with a trust or part of an estate administration, do you have those documents? Are you familiar with them? Do you know what they say? Do you have the proper authority to be able to do what it is that we're looking to do? Some of the other things we'd like to consider is, how are we going to have this house sold? Are we going to try and take that on ourselves, or are we going to engage a real estate agent to try and help us with that? And then trying to foresee any other issues that might be, let's say, a red flag to a buyer or something that may cause a potential issue. One example, as I said before, was permits or maybe some type of violation that was issued. Others can be something as simple as having a tenant in the property. Is there a written lease? Does that lease allow for, when is that going to be coming up? Does that allow for you to be able to have the tenant vacate? Are you going to be selling it subject to the tenancy? So again, we want to try and frame it in the sense of what are potential issues that I could see coming up, and then how do we address them?
I agree. And I think it's a lot about, I call it getting your ducks in a row, right? So I'm about to sell my house. I want to make sure I have my deed. I want to make sure that if I did any work on the house, I have all the proper documentation, like a permit closure or a C of O, which is a certificate of occupancy. If I have my house in a trust, right? I want to make sure I just have a copy of the trust, right? You just lay it out, you have it, you can have peace of mind. And believe me, when the time comes, you'll just grab it and say, here it is, right? And if you hire a real estate attorney, I love this, it's like you have your own personal guide. They're going to tell you. I know in our office, we have a real estate department. Tommy happens to do most of the real estate deals here. And Tommy is your guide. He says, okay, we're going to need this, we're going to need this, and this is how it's going to go. And it helps take a lot of the stress off.
Exactly.
And I just want to bring up something that comes up a lot. Some of my clients will say, oh, I think I'm in contract and I have someone representing me. And they're thinking about the real estate agent as opposed to the attorney. And I know, Tommy, you've experienced this too. The real estate agent, also sometimes known as the broker, is different than the attorney. The real estate agent is the one that shows you around, helps you sell the house, walks people through, a very important role. The attorney's role is, from a legal standpoint, negotiating the contract, making sure all your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted. So Tommy's right. These are all things you want to consider. I call it getting your ducks in a row. And that's kind of where we are if you're thinking about selling your house.
So from there, we want to move on to what should we do before we put up that for sale sign. And the thing that both Kim and I already touched on is perhaps engaging a real estate broker, an agent, to help you with that. And now there are pros and cons to each. What is the pro to doing it all by yourself? Well, the one thing that everybody loves is you can save some money, right? Everybody loves that answer. And right now, the typical commission is about 4 to 6%. On the island, it's averaging around 4, but as you get closer to the city and the boroughs, you're at the 5 or 6 mark, and that can seem like a significant amount of money. But you also have to think about, what are you trading for that, right? If you're going to be the person responsible, it's going to take a lot of your time. And a lot of us work, a lot of us have other obligations and responsibilities. Is that something that you can honestly take on? Are you going to be able to market the house yourself, show it to potential buyers? One of the things that you're going to be trading is your time. So your time is also money. So it's something that you need to consider. The advantage of having a broker is, one, you get their experience, and this is something that they do on a daily basis. They're going to be familiar with the market. They might have a list of potential buyers already, or they're associated with networks of other brokers who have potential buyers. They also know what these buyers are looking for. So they're going to be able to help frame and set it up for you in a way that is going to make it clear, hey, you know what? Perhaps we should do these small changes, and it'll significantly increase the attraction of buyers. And it also prevent you from maybe doing too many repairs or too much work that you think might be necessary to get the house sold. So you want that expertise, and it certainly has value.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, as Tommy said, you have two options. You can do it yourself, or you could hire a real estate agent. Some people do it themselves, and they do it successfully. But I will say that sometimes a real estate agent has some further insight based on experience about how things should be staged, how things should look, certain things you want to disclose, certain things, you want to get in writing, things that maybe, I would, as a person just selling my house, be not familiar with. So, you have to weigh, as Tommy said, the pros and cons and do what's right for you. And I would agree with you, Tommy. You made some excellent points.
So
So how do you get your home ready for a sale? You know, we have to prepare to sell our home. I would like to say you could just walk in and see it and okay, I'll take it. But really, with everything else, when it comes to selling something, there's a certain sort of image or preparation that you want to put into it so that you can get, you know, the highest price that you're looking for. So
yeah.
Tommy, tell us a little bit about this.
Kim, that's absolutely right. So one way of thinking about it is this may be the end of your story at this property, but you have to keep in mind that it's somebody else's beginning. And we want to make sure that when they pull up to that house, when they're walking in, it's that they can see their future there. So what's gonna help them achieve that? How are they gonna feel that? We want to make sure that, you know, it's presentable, right? We want to have that curb appeal. It could be something as simple as making sure the landscaping is all nice and kept and that everything is just in order. When they walk inside, we want to see look organized and neat. I'm not saying that you have to re-renovate the entirety of the house, but you want to make sure that it is presentable. And as we stated in the previous slide, this is also a place where having a real estate agent is going to be to your advantage because they're going to tell you what these buyers are looking for. They're going to say, you know, the first thing they're going to look at right when they pull up to that curb, they want to see the outside of the house. Is this a house that they can envision coming home to every day? Right? Then they're going to walk in, and then there's going to be certain parts of the house that are going to be more important than others. Perhaps it's the kitchen and bathrooms or whatever that family needs at that time. And those are the sort of ideas that you want in your head when you're framing the house to make sure that it is presentable the way that you, as if you were a buyer, would want to see the house.
Yeah, I love this list. Declutter, curb appeal. We all know that what that's like when you pull up to house, right? Just when you're visiting somebody, you pull up to the house, you go, wow, that's a nice house. You haven't even stepped foot in it, but because of the curb appeal, right? Your brain goes to a certain place with it where you're thinking already positive before you even step in the door. So it's declutter, curb appeal, clean. They call it staging, right? You want to do it a certain way because visually people are drawn to certain things. And of course, listen to your agent. They have experience in this. They know what people's eyes go to. They know what they're looking for. So I love this list. I think it's short, but I think it's to the point and I think it's right on. All right. So before you accept that offer, you know, what should you be thinking about?
So we thought about what we need to consider prior to. Then we thought about, all right, how are we going to go about it? How are we going to prepare it? But now we have to think about what we need to do before we actually say yes to an offer. So there are different factors. One of them being is the cash buyer versus the financed or somebody needing a mortgage, correct? So with cash offers, they sound enticing. They sound great because that typically means a quicker turnaround time. That also can typically mean, though, it might be for a lesser price than what you maybe would have achieved with someone who's looking for financing. However, one of the positives about a cash buyer is that they're less restrictive than if you were to pursue someone who is using a bank for financing purposes. And to give you an example, the bank has to secure their loan and they have to make sure that that property is up to date and has everything in order to secure that loan. So I had one client who had, it was a house that they were selling. The roof was 20 plus years old. It had 3 layers of shingles on it. And the person who was purchasing it was using a bank to finance the purchase. And in order to get the mortgage commitment, they needed to get homeowners insurance. In order to get the homeowners insurance, though, they needed to make sure that the house wasn't too much of a liability. And with that roof, they refused to issue the homeowners insurance. So that also meant that they couldn't get their mortgage commitment. So sometimes when you have financing, there are certain other restrictions or other work that may need to be done, whereas someone who's going to come in and purchase it for cash is going to buy it knowing what that is and not have those same type of restrictions as a bank would, which leads me right into the next point of purchasing what is called as is. Now, some people have misconceptions as to what that means. So as is could also be a term of art, but this is why your communication with your attorney and with your broker is key throughout this entire process. what you might think as is not the same that this buyer may be thinking, right? As is typically is its physical condition. Is there a hole in the wall? Is a piece of the siding missing? Certain things like that is when people say as is, but it doesn't necessarily extend to permit issues or violations or electric and plumbing issues that you can't see. So if you are aware of those certain situations, it goes back to the things that we need to consider when preparing to sell. If we're aware of these situations, we need to make sure that we're ahead of those. So that way we can either disclose that we can disclose it to our attorney so that they know how to prepare for it, and also disclose that to the real estate agent so that when they're showing the prospective buyers that this is all going to be addressed, because we don't like surprises. Nobody likes surprises. And a purchaser, if something comes up afterwards, it might be a turnoff. It might lead to something that might kill the deal. But if we're open and transparent about it from the get-go and what it is that we actually are thinking, then I think that could also help. One of the other things you should consider, especially if you're selling your home, is are you going to be purchasing a new home? Some people might have a second residence, or some people might have the money already to be able to purchase a second home while this is going on. But a lot of people are relying on the proceeds of this sale in order to purchase their new home. So if that's the case, sometimes the timing doesn't always line up. So is it going to be a potential that I might have to stay in the property even after we close for a little bit in order to get myself situated? That could not only mean just for purposes of finding a new house, but perhaps you have a child or children that are in the school system and you want them to finish the year, and there's still a couple months left to go. But these are all things, as I said, that should be discussed with your broker so that they can disclose that to the buyers and that everybody's on the same page before we get into accepting that offer.
Agreed. And I think one of the things I would take away from this is let your attorney guide you too, right? So if you tell them, this is the situation, like the shingle example Tommy gave, right? This is a situation, your attorney may say, look, we're probably going to look for maybe a cash deal or something of that nature, or we will do a mortgage, but here's what you can expect, right? As long as you understand and you're prepared, it still works out. You just have to go in with eyes wide open. And what is as is, your attorney is going to be helping you negotiate that contract so that there is no sort of gray area as to what the buyer thought and what the seller thought and where we're supposed to be. So your attorney is like your guide. And they're going to help you from a legal standpoint, making sure you're very clear as to what direction you want to go in.
Absolutely.
All right. So I love this one. Falling apart, right? How to avoid a sale from just falling apart. Sometimes, look, I never say never. So in this world, things happen, things, deteriorate. But typically, if you do some of these steps in advance, you really can avoid the deterioration and the quote unquote falling apart of the deal. So Tommy, I'm going to let you walk through some of these issues to help avoid that.
Absolutely. And I think Kim, you put it perfectly. It's about managing the expectations. If we do that from the very beginning and with your communication with your attorney, they're going to be there to understand what your expectations are and to make sure that everything that follows is going to be pursuant to what it is that you're looking to accomplish. So with the title issues, right, these are certain things that we discussed very early on, whether there were permits that were done. So sometimes we think that we don't have any issues, right? We think, well, yeah, that back deck, I took out the permit for that. And then all of a sudden the title report comes in and then we see that there's an open permit for that deck. Sometimes it's not that you didn't take the precaution or go through what you had to in order to get that permit, but sometimes it could be something really as simple as not having it completed once it was done and filing that certificate of completion. It might seem something that's so trivial. You're like, I went through all the trouble. I hired the right people. I went through the town. I got the permits. What are we talking about? But sometimes that is the case. So it could be something as easy as we hire an expediter and they just make sure that it was done to code and they'll issue the certificate. Or sometimes it could be something more. But again, if we know that we did work and we know, even the saying ahead of time, I know I did not get a permit for the bathroom I put in the basement. Well, okay, this goes back to, again, the communication with your attorney. Maybe we're not going to make representations and we're going to make that clear to the buyer. Hey, We understand that there might be a potential issue here, but your understanding is you're going to be buying it subject to those certain issues. So another issue that comes up quite often is boundary issues. So in the title report, there's also going to be a survey, or a new survey is going to be conducted. And over the course of many years, between putting up fences, taking them down, you'll notice that once the survey is done, they're going to show that, okay, this fence line is over a foot on my property. My neighbor's fence is over a foot on my property. Now that can cause an issue. We call that out of possession issue. So some of these things could be done through an affidavit to be resolved. It would take some coordinating with you and your neighbor, but again, these are certain things that we might necessarily not be able to foresee. However, your attorney, again, is going to be your spokesperson, your guide, and is going to be able to tell you, okay, we've seen this before, this is what we're going to have to do. And then they're going to be able to help you navigate what it is that you need to do in order to resolve these issues. Another common one is an open mortgage. You might see when the title report comes on that there is an open mortgage from 1990, and you might say to yourself, well, I finished paying that off a few years ago. I know that there's no mortgage there. That could be something as simple as they never filed a satisfaction mortgage. So depending on how old it was or how recent, we can either contact the bank, get that, and have it filed, or it might also something be done through an affidavit if the mortgage is old enough. And if there is an open mortgage, that doesn't mean you can't sell the property, but just so you have an expectation, understanding is that loan will need to be paid off at the time of closing before any other dollars distributed elsewhere. Another common is judgments. So what they'll do is they're going to run your name in the title report, and it's going to try and track and see if there are any judgments against you or against the property that, again, might cause an issue for the future purchaser, the future owner of that home. If you have a common name, you will often see that there are several judgments that may come back, but they may not be you, right? And you'll know this because it'll say the address of the person, and you'll say, that was never me. I don't know who those people are. And there are ways of verifying that through running your social security to making sure that that wasn't actually you. But if in the event it is a judgment that was against you and that you're responsible for, again, it could be something similar to the open mortgage where the satisfaction of judgment was never filed, or it is something that you will have to satisfy prior to or at the closing in order to be able to close title on the property. Lastly is also having a home in a trust, which is something we see often with our clients. Now, with a trust, there is the trust document itself. Again, going back to the very first beginning, are you prepared? Do you have a copy of that document? Are you familiar with it? Do you know what the terms are? Are you allowed to sell it? Because the title company is going to want to see a copy of that document. They're going to want to verify that you are the person that is able to sell this property, that you have the proper authority to do it, and that it's pursuant to whatever the terms of those trusts are. So a lot of these things, again, if we have that open communication and you have the attorney from the start, they're going to help talk you through all these things. And hopefully by the time we see them in the title report, they're not going to be a surprise, and that we already have an answer or already have something in place to take care of these issues before they actually become an issue.
Yeah, I agree. So everything on this list here is not insurmountable. What these things are is, hey, these are some of the things that if we're prepared in advance or as they come along, because you'll have your attorney to work through these things with you, then you can get through them and your deal won't fall apart and both parties will be happy in the end. All right, so the attorney's role in the sale of the home. And honestly, I can't underestimate how important it is to have a professional work alongside you. That's why I mentioned the real estate agent. You know, they have some insight into the sale process. And then your attorney, like I said earlier, your attorney is your guide, is the person who's going to be legally advising you. And as I said earlier, Tom in our office, he heads up a lot of the real estate here. So there's no better attorney to co-present on this webinar and walk you through what our role would be as the attorneys on the sale.
And I agree. I think having an attorney in this process is an invaluable resource. I mean, we've mentioned it, Kim and I both mentioned it throughout the presentation of where that attorney would come in and how they'd be handy. And it starts right from the very beginning. When you need help brainstorming, you have no idea where to start. You say, I want to sell a home. I've never done it before. Maybe you inherited the house and you were never even a party to purchasing a home. You didn't even know where to start. Well, that's what we're here for, right? We're here to, one, help you collect and gather those thoughts, help you prepare, tell you what you're going to need, tell you what you're going to expect. And then not only that, but even if you're toying with that fact of, do I want to hire an agent? Well, we can help you walk through that. We can even help review their agreement to make sure that it's in your best favor. When an offer comes in, you're going to say, hey, Tommy, I got this offer. I have one that's a cash, I have one that's a mortgage. Can we weigh the pros and cons? And that's exactly what we're here for. And then when it actually comes down to the physical work, other than just being there as a support system, we're going to be the ones who are going to be drafting the contract. So that's why that communication is key. I need to understand what it is your expectations are. I need to know if you know of any issues that might come up. I need to make sure I'm going to be prepared for those. If you're going to tell me, Tommy, there's no way I'm going to be doing any work to this property, I'm selling it strictly as is, and I mean that as is. I'm not making representations about electric, plumbing, any of it. Well, then those are all things that I need to know because that's going to be going into the contract, right? And then the attorney is also going to negotiate the terms with the purchaser's attorney. We're going to hold the escrow of the down payment. And then once we're actually in contract, the purchaser is going to order the title report. That's where we go back to the previous slide of where those issues might come up, and we're going to be responsible for looking through that report, looking for any issues, and either one, if it's something that we haven't seen before, how do we get ahead of it? We're going to communicate with you throughout the entirety of that process and tell you, okay, this is what we need to do in order to resolve X, Y, and Z. Some of the things, it's something that we may be able to handle unilaterally, whether it be drafting of an affidavit and say, okay, we've done this before, or hey, I might need to make a phone call. And then we're going to attend and arrange the closing for you. We're going to prepare the deed and the transfer docs, and then we're going to be physically there with you at the closing table, making sure that the end of the process is as smooth as possible. And lastly, if there are any post-closing issues that might come up, as we said earlier, if there's a holdover, if perhaps the buyer is pushing to have the deal closed because they're afraid that their rate lock is going to expire, and even though they know you're not ready to leave the property, they might still insist on closing. Okay, well then maybe we can work out a post closing holdover agreement, or perhaps we just didn't have enough time to get that open permit issue resolved, and we might hold some money in escrow until that issue is resolved. And like we said, we're there for you from beginning to the end. We're going to try and make that as smooth as possible. Our job is to try and take away as much of the stress as from you as possible, and to make it as easy for you as possible.
Wonderful. Perfect. Okay. So Ashley is going to jump in here, I think, at this point, because what we're going to do is we're going to answer some questions. Before we answer the questions, though, of course, if you are thinking of selling your home and you want us to help you, we are absolutely more than happy to be a resource for you. Here's our contact information up on the screen. Of course, if you have a family member or a friend, we'll help them too. As I said, we have a wonderful real estate department in our office, and we have as you can see, a very experienced real estate attorney working there as well. Of course, we work as a team here, so all of us partners are involved, and we're happy to help. So let's answer some questions. I saw some good ones. I'm ready. All right, so some of the questions came in earlier. Some of the questions came in as we went along. So, I think I'll take the ones that came in first. Ashley, do you have those? If not, I have them. So the first one, they called it financial ramifications. And I like this one because I think it also ties into another question, I believe, that Joe asked, and it was, what are capital gains taxes? And I kind of think they go hand in hand because they could be viewed as financial ramifications. So one of the things our clients are always worried about is something called a capital gains tax. What's a capital gains tax? Well, if I make a profit on what I bought my house for, the government would like nothing less than to tax me on the profit that I made, right? The profit is called a gain, right? So how do they calculate that? How do we come up with capital gains? We look at what we bought it for, plus all the improvements that we put in through the years while we were the resident there. And then we take what we can sell it for, and we come up with a number is the profit that you made. Let's do an example. I have a cost basis, what I bought it for, plus my improvements of $100,000. I can sell my house for $400,000. So what they do is they take the 400 minus the 100, and you get a profit of $300,000, and they'd love to tax you on it and call it a capital gain. Here's the good news, where there is something called a capital gains tax exclusion. All right, so if it is your primary residence, then you're each allowed a $250,000 capital gains tax exclusion. I say each if you're a married couple, $250 if you're single. And what that does is it serves to offset the capital gains tax if you are eligible for it. So that's how you calculate capital gains taxes. It's something that you want to address with your attorney and certainly with your tax preparer to make sure that you are prepared if there is going to be one, right? Typically, we see capital gains on a sale of a house that isn't a person's primary residence. So you just want to be mindful. Doesn't mean you're not going to go forward with the sale, but it is something to consider. It is something to speak to your attorney about and your tax professional about as well. So I think we covered the capital gains question. I think we covered the financial ramification question. Of course, financial ramifications come in all different forms. You want to be prepared as possible so that additional costs don't occur. Speaking of costs, we have another question from Tara. What are typical costs for the seller? And I think that also ties into another question, Tommy, someone said, I think, what is the order of things? What is the time order of retaining the attorney, the real estate agent, showing the property, etc.? If you can walk through that timing and then layer in the typical costs, I think that would serve to answer two of our questions.
Absolutely. So what I would say as far as timing goes, I would say hiring that attorney and seeking that attorney first is going to be your absolute first thing you should do, because they're going to be able to guide you through every step and decision you're going to make thereafter. Second to that would be hiring a real estate agent if that's the route you decide to take, as opposed to selling it to yourself as a for sale by owner. And then from that point, your real estate agent will be the one responsible for marketing and then showing that property, leading to your offer, then to the contract. As far as the costs go, typical to the seller are, it's always going to be case specific, but as far as some general idea, if you are going to be retaining a real estate agent, the seller is always going to be responsible for that commission cost. And that commission, that percentage is always going to be based on what you negotiate. As I said, right now, typical on Long Island is about 4%. That's usually 2 for the selling and 2 for the listing broker. But again, there are different ways that you can negotiate that. Aside from your brokerage fees, you're also going to have title fees. Both sides of the transaction, both purchasers and sellers, are going to have title fees. As a seller in New York State, you're responsible for New York State transfer tax. That's based on a formula. It's $2 for every $500. So you'll take your purchase price, divide it by 500, times it by 2. That's how you'll calculate what your tax is. Also incorporated in those title fees could also be if you have an old mortgage that you need to satisfy, then there's the recording fees for the satisfaction of mortgage. Same thing for judgments. And then outside of your title fees, you typically have a title closure fee, which is what you would pay to the person who is attending the closing on behalf of the title company. And lastly, you would have your legal fees of whatever your attorney's legal fees are for the transaction.
Excellent. All right. So that was very helpful. We are a little over time, so I am just going to answer a few more questions. I think we'll be able to answer all of them, but I will be succinct about it, so to speak. So the one thing I'm going to say before I answer these questions is that this is a general program. This is not a substitute for legal advice in your particular situation. Okay, so nothing I say here should you substitute for your own personal meeting to have it tailored to your specific situation. One of the questions we have here is, how do I borrow money from my 401k for a down payment if all my money is tied up in investments? So the first thing I would say is this: before you do that, you want to speak to your tax preparer, your accountant, and your financial planner to make sure that that makes the most sense for you. So for example, if you're in a situation where you've taken a loss on a lot of your assets, maybe it's the right time to take them from your investments, even though they're tied up, right? Or if you want to take it from the 401k, you just want to make sure you understand any tax ramifications, such as withdrawing income and things of that nature. In its purest level, if I'm going to borrow money from my 401k, A, make sure you're the right age so you do not get hit with penalties. And B, you're going to contact the plan administrator of the 401k to make those withdrawals. Next question is, what kinds of challenges will we encounter being our home in an irrevocable trust executed by me in 2010? All right, well, honestly, none. So think of the trust, and again, this is not all trusts are created equally. I'm answering this very specific question because it appears that the person said that I created it. But as long as you have a copy of the trust, and you will, we will just provide it to the title company, and it will be smooth sailing from there. Okay. Thank you, Tommy. You already answered Gina's second question about the order of things and retaining an attorney. Jim asked us a question, interesting. If you're the survivor of a joint tenancy and sell the house, can you get a step up in basis for capital gain? Well, I would want to understand the timeline and the progression of that deed. Did we purchase it on the onset together? Was it transferred to me in some fashion? How, was it taken? Was it through an inheritance? That will help me better guide the person on the answer. Typically speaking, upon a person's passing, you will get a half a step up in basis when it comes to a piece of property. But again, this is a very general seminar or webinar, I guess I should say. So my recommendation is you meet with us and we'll understand the facts and give you a clear answer as to your particular question. And one more question we had from Nancy. And again, general answer, but a successor trustee is selling a home in Florida. The home is in a revocable living trust. One trustor died. Step up in cost basis. So it sounds like, first of all, there's so many questions that I would have before I answered this question in particular. Number one, was the person a resident of New York, or was the person a resident of Florida when they passed away? Number two, I would want to see the trust to really look at the provisions in it, because you can't always give advice without seeing the document. So again, I would say, come in for a meeting, have a conference, let us review your documents, and we'll be able to answer those questions for you in detail. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I think it was a good program with a lot of substance. As you can see, hiring an attorney, being prepared, getting ready to sell your home is no small undertaking, but it also doesn't have to be long or difficult, as long as you have that guide and you have that roadmap and you are prepared. So I'm going to let Tommy say a few parting words. I just wanted to say thank you for participating today. And without further ado, you're up, Tommy.
All right. I also would like to thank you all for taking the time out of your very busy days to spend some time with us, kind of get a feel for how we are as a firm and exactly what kind of things that you need to consider and what it is that you should be looking for when you're looking for an attorney. And also, Kim, I think you basically said it best. So again, thank you all, and we hope to see you soon.
Have a
Have
nice day,
great
everyone.
day.
Bye.
Bye.